But it is a real honor and a pleasure to be here with all of you today. That anytime you are interacting with somebody else for some purpose, you're negotiating. And that means that you, the students you're working with, if you're a teacher, a principal, the leadership you're working with, one of their, if not their prime tool is the ability to negotiate effectively. So how do you deal with this human dimension? So we'll be talking about that today. I'll be sharing one of many different kinds of models on how we think about that in our own work. How do you deal with the emotional dimension? How do you deal with your emotions? And how do you deal with the emotions of other people? Generally speaking, when I ask this question, the first response I tend to hear, don't get emotional. Don't leave your emotions at that door right there and walk in like this super hyper-rational robot that you know we all are and negotiate. Of course, you cannot do that. Can't get rid of these things called emotions. The research now suggests we don't want to. The positive emotions can be very helpful. So how do you deal with emotions? What do you do with these things? What do you do with them, very practically speaking? Great, I know you're angry, I know I'm upset. What do we do? And I know what caused it, and so on. And ultimately, where did we come in terms of this question? To back it up one slide, as you negotiate, how should you deal with emotions? Yours, theirs? Our response, don't. Don't deal with emotions per se. If you have the time and the savvy and are practiced and so on, fabulous. But you need somewhat of a heuristic in the heat of a conflict or a negotiation. And so our ultimate suggestion is to turn your attention one step back, away from all of those different emotions, toward a handful of things that Roger Fisher, my colleague, and I call core concerns. Matters that are important to all of us. And by understanding these 5 core concerns, brings you power in a negotiation. So we're going to walk through each of these 5 core concerns, some in more depth than others, but so you have a sense of what they are, how you might utilize them in a negotiation. So the first of these 5 core concerns, these aren't emotions, by the way. These are things that tend to stimulate emotions. You deal with them well, you engender the positive emotions. The moment I start trampling on your core concerns, or you on mine, all of a sudden you get the negative emotions. And you get people who are not as inclined to share information. They're not going to be as loyal to you. They're not going to be as loyal to the outcome. You get all of these negative consequences. So with that, the first of our core concerns is appreciation. Now, I have no doubt you all have known, since you were the size of Noah or even my younger kids, that appreciation is an important concern. None of us likes to feel unheard or devalued or put down. But as you know as well, science has only recently started to catch up with just how powerful appreciation is. If I want to appreciate somebody else in a conflict situation, first thing I want to do is to better understand their perspective. But you're missing this essential element of appreciating, which is this. It's finding merit in what the other person thinks, or feels, or does. I understand where you're coming from. I think you're crazy. Versus, I understand where you're coming from, and that makes sense. I may not agree with you, Israelis or Palestinians. I may not agree on that 1967 border line, but I understand where you're coming from, and that makes sense. And thirdly, I'm letting you know. It's communicating that understanding and the merit that you see in the other person's perspective. And it's those second 2 parts that turn the conflict from this tension to, you do appreciate me. We have strong differences, but you hear where I'm coming from and I you. But it was that challenge. How do you appreciate? Not just when things are nice and fuzzy, but in the heat of conflict. How do you effectively understand the other, demonstrate that understanding in terms of the merit that you see? That's the power of appreciation. So let's keep moving on to the second of our core concerns, and this is autonomy. And my goal with that little exercise was really just to help you feel what autonomy is about. So autonomy is the freedom to make decisions without somebody else imposing a decision on you. So the big advice, if you are working with leadership, if you're working with students, if you're working with a principal working with your teams, what's the big advice on how to deal more effectively with autonomy? We've tried to boil it down to just its basic essence. ACBD. Always consult before deciding. So the third of our core concerns is affiliation. Affiliation is the emotional connection between you and another. In the context of negotiation, that sense of connection is tremendously powerful. How do you shift the energy? It's no longer me versus you, but it's the two of us working side by side together. Let me just say these final two core concerns. You know them, but just so you don't feel like they're totally neglected and they feel disaffiliated. So the final two core concerns, status. In short, status is about who's up, who's down, in some sort of hierarchy. And the fifth of our core concerns is role. Do you have a fulfilling role, a meaningful role in your negotiations and in life? So that's the part of the idea behind this concept of role. What roles are you playing? Are they fulfilling? Are they effective? So these last two I know have gotten a little bit of a short shrift, but just to give you the full picture, you put this model together, these ideas together, you start to get a framework. And so our suggestion is to turn your attention one step back, away from all of those emotions, toward a handful of things, 5 things that tend to stimulate a lot of emotions in a conflict, in negotiation. Final big point, why is there the power to these core concerns? Because you can use them in 2 different ways. One, you can use them as a lens. So the next time you find yourself in a conflict with your spouse, with a family member, with somebody at work, just walk through these 5 core concerns. And secondly, and I really believe this is a huge part of the power of this framework, you can use these same 5 core concerns not just to diagnose, but to offer a lever, to stimulate positive emotions. For those of you who are interested in learning more, I welcome conversation. Thank you all so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, John. Thank you. Thank you.